The ancient past is a great mystery to us. We tend to look at the many relics that we dig up, the many stories that we hear, and project into that unknown our own interpretations, convenient interpretations. Often, too, when it comes to understanding the ancient past, it's very profitable to come out with some superfluous claims. It is great for the tabloids, and it's great for sensation, and it's great for gathering attention, views, and a following. A less popular take would be to actually thoroughly go through, slog through those waters, and really investigate those strange motifs like giants, demigods, or the sensational names now, the Nephilim, the Anunnaki. In the ancient past, we were surrounded with nature, and so we understood divinity as nature. In contemporary times, when we project back into the past, we like to use our modern interpretations. So, for instance, we like the simulation theory because now, instead of being surrounded by nature, we are surrounded by computers. In the same vein, aliens, the idea of aliens, physical aliens, would be something great to project as to the cosmic scheme, another means for us to interpret the unknown. However, in this session, our duty here is to understand the claims of giants and demigods on the level of those giving that story, offering a variety of different explanations as to these giants. And the stories are various. They go across the world. And so instead of making these over-summative and these kind of ham-fisted claims, we're going to slog in those waters. And we're going to decide what we think instead. But in order to offer this, I'm going to have to move very quickly across subject matters and across the world. And it might naturally seem that I'm going to be off subject, like I'm going into irrelevant places. But what's important is when we thread all of these details together at the end. Greater perspective comes with its due diligence, and greater understanding comes with the thoroughness of context. But enough hedging. Let's begin. Our first subject is mountain spirits. And while this is universal across the animistic past, a great example for us to follow is Korea. Uniquely in the modern world, Korea has retained its shamanism. They say estimates of 300,000 people still practice it there to this day. And in that, we have a reverence, a long withheld, thousands of years long reverence of mountains. Mountains as protectors, mountains that provide food, water, materials, and offer this greater supernatural liminal aspect. Prominent mountains are given a benevolent quality, and this benevolent quality is called sansin. This particular spirit of mountain offers blessings, protection to those that worship it. Accordingly, there is no shortage of mountain shrines. This sansin is typically personified by an old man with a flowing beard. This spirit of the mountain is often given symbols of longevity and many disciples that help to upkeep that spirit of the mountain. The most famous of the sansin is Dangun, who was the first ruler of Korea. Right away, we're seeing an individual who lived that has ascended into a post of deification or approaching deification. So this individual who was mortal now has a greater, larger status. This mythologizing move is not unique to Korea by any means. This is very common with the Celts, for instance. Doing our due diligence in taking on the mind of the ancient animist or the modern animist, then we should look at the mountain and think, what is the significance here? And in that, the sky is perceived to be the realm of the spirits, the heavens. The mountain offers this unique opportunity to ascend into the heavens. It is a meeting point between the realm of the spirits and the earth. And so these mysterious, liminal, divine qualities are enladened at its peak and in its midst. You go to the mountain to attain visions, to reach enlightenment. This is the holy mountain. This trope, this approach is universal. This is Mount Shasta. This is Mount Olympus, Mount Sinai. For some reason, any religion, any spirituality has this inclination towards acknowledging the axis mundi. While we're here, we should greater frame this. Fairly common in cosmogonies around the world, there is the dismemberment myth, that the creator broke themselves into many pieces that substantiated the earth. Pengu, for the ancient Chinese mythology, did this. His breath became the wind. His voice became thunder. Left eye the sun, right eye the moon. This is very common. And in other cases, his whole body became the mountains. Often in these, they become the mountains. The creators become the mountains. By the way, this Pengu seems very etymologically relatable to the Polynesian Rangi. So some curious leads there. But it's to say that when we see these holy mountains, we are seeing the body of the creator. This adds even more sophistication to this supernatural aspect. Also, volcanoes, for this matter, being thought of as an act of divinity. When that thing goes off and causes cataclysm, it is the will of the divine. So mountains in themselves, this is what we're doing here, is we're serving this idea of the liminal supernatural quality, the uncanniness that can come from going into that mountain by virtue of the animistic or ancient mind. One might also project themselves into the ancient world and think of the sight of a lenticular cloud. This is what they call a weather balloon. On top of the mountain or above the volcano, this circular cloud, whether glowing red or gold, this sight is a sign. One of the many strange things that comes from the mountain. Let's briefly go back to Korea. There are a great number of spirits that come from the mountain. One of these is Dokkaebi. We would translate this as goblins. And of course, these goblins do very well at keeping children from going on their own too far into the woods or into the mountain to avoid graveyards or dark forests or abandoned buildings. And these particular spirits take on many forms that are all mischievous. big eyes, protruding curved fangs, horns, so on. In fairness, there are many types of this spirit, and pay attention to these different types. There are those that are more beneficial. They will take from the rich and give to the poor. There are those that are more purely evil. There are those that are quite attractive looking, hint for later. There are those that only have one eye. They are cyclopses, hint for later. And there are those that only have one leg. Very strange, but yet again, a hint for later. All of this is hinting towards this innate quality that comes with certain mountains or certain mountain ranges that bring about superstition and that bring about odd, uncanny feelings, especially when you are alone out there. And we don't have to go far to see this substantiated in the modern day and much closer to home. Appalachia in the States is full of superstitions. One ought to plant their crops under the full moon. If a bad storm is coming, you should put an axe with two edges in a stump to push the storm around you. If cows are laying down and the leaves around you are upside down, it's going to rain. Never leave a rocking chair rocking or you will invite the spirits in. And no whistling in the woods at night. This is not something lost to us in the deep ancient past. This lives. But this is just one of the approaches that will bolster our foundation for our later interpretation. So for now, we move on and we're going to the Aboriginals of Australia. This is the Yowie. This is the Australian Bigfoot, so to speak. Bipedal, hairy, ape-like, between 7 feet and 12 feet tall. A flat and wide nose, known to be either shy and timid or aggressive. Of course, this kind of, quote, folklore is not unique to Australia. There's the Yetis in Asia. There's Sasquatch in the States. A colloquial saying amongst the natives of the Northwest is to call them the quiet ones. And in many cases, they are known as cannibals. The Aboriginals have a long and detailed history with these Yowies. And of course, they go by many names. But let's zoom out a bit on this. This is an ape-like man. Okay? And these stories are inherited from the deep past. Might we say that these stories are a reminder of our deep past and our deep ancestry? The Australopithecus, the Gigantopithecus, the Homo neanderthalis. What happened to these siblings of ours? What would have they been like? Their different characteristics. Would some of them have been cannibals? Would others have outright ignored us, avoided us? If we held on to these stories, then what would they sound like? This is a distinct possibility, mind you. Not to explain all stories of giants, but maybe some. They still can't approximate when we split from the Neanderthal. 300 to 800,000 years ago, and they still can't quite say when they went extinct. Did they completely assimilate into the Homo sapien? Were they hunted out of existence? Open questions here. But let's jump out of that interpretation and just look at some Native American stories. As a broad stroke, if we're going to look at them thematically, there is a theme of cannibalism, that the giants are cannibals. There is a theme that the giants have a stone-like quality to their skin, a stone description about them. The Wabanaki have a story of the Kugu, and this is a man-eating giant, usually depicted as female, sometimes made out to be a sea monster as well. The curious thing here is it's said that if you go into the mountains, the monster is often mistaken for a boulder. In the liminal quality of the mountain, it is very common to see these tremendous stones, these tremendous rocks that at times take on a face. They look like a person. And especially in passing, one might think that this is a silhouette out there or this giant being in the distance looking down. There is plenty of corroboration as to this specific trope, and this is not to sell it all out. It's not to say this is the answer to it all, because there's a lot of diversity as to each of these stories. But to corroborate this stone quality, you can look to the Cherokee and this colloquial name of the stone-clad, these stone-skinned giants or man-sized people that have this impervious quality to weapons or to fire, so on. Giving variance its due credence, we could look at a different sort of story from the Choctaw. They said that when they came to the Mississippi, there was a race of white cannibalistic giants. The people of Peru reported a number of truly giant people, eyes the size of small plates, arriving on their shores, and them having these very strange and revolting sexual habits. The claim is that these people went extinct. And this is a hint for later as well. Jumping out of this for now, there are a number of sites that have been proven as a hoax, but do great in the way of reaching tabloids, as mentioned earlier. But there are anomalous sites that contribute to this greater conversation that are in earnest a mystery. Such is the case of the Matsien footprints in Botswana. Estimates say that these footprints, these impressions into the stone, happened maximum 10,000 years ago. These singular footprints, not 2 feet, just 1 footprint at a time, that aren't especially big footprints, mind you, but the creation story of this formation is that it is the first ancestor. And this is a one-legged giant. So there it is again. This one-legged quality? Anyhow, this is where we start to really track. This was all context, and now we're really going to start following a line here. We're moving into the more familiar territory of Sumeria, Greece, and so on. In Sumeria and Babylon, we have the Epic of Gilgamesh. And there's this character that appears, Humbaba. And this is a very telling character for our purposes. I need to mention something that we've learned plenty in this course already, but throughout the time of Sumer, we had what was originally nature worship move into nature conquering as an idea. The Namu, who was the beneficent goddess, became Tiamat, that villainous goddess that ought to be slayed. This transition of interpretation, and Humbaba is also a part of this. Humbaba initially is likened to a deity of the forest. Tablets outside and prior to the Epic of Gilgamesh make it clear that Humbaba is a beneficent kind of god in this way, spirit. The Epic of Gilgamesh, though, makes him out to be more repulsive, this giant that ought to be slain in the glory seeking for Gilgamesh. And this tie with the cedar forest is very clear in the story. Cutting down the tree angers Humbaba. Killing Humbaba upsets the gods, even though they let him off from punishment for doing so. So this is a direct allegory for the conquering of nature. I say this for a few reasons. Because later in the story, Gilgamesh slays the bull of heaven. The bull of heaven is thunder. That is the power of nature, that roaring in the sky. This whole story of the Epic of Gilgamesh is Gilgamesh seeking to conquer nature in order to eventually achieve immortality. Turns out to be a fruitless quest, hint, hint for the modern age. But both Humbaba and the Bull of Heaven play this same allegory. Man attempting to conquer that which was divinity in latent. So this deity who is viewed as a giant, divinity viewed as bigger than us, literally, if we were to anthropomorphize it, you see, is being killed, is viewed as something that can be killed by us. This not only is a distinctive change in the mind of mankind, but illustrates our story a little bit more as well. After killing Humbaba, they take his head off. And this is a motif that was popular in the ancient world. Plenty of excavations dig up these depictions of Humbaba's head. So we might wonder when these stories of giants being slain might be just allegorical for man's triumph over nature or over the gods? And then we can ask, well, where else in this greater Western canon that we're more familiar with can we find giants? And of course, there's the Norse. We're not going there, unfortunately. That could be its own thing. But the most famous, the one that people most recognize, is the Cyclops. And etymologically, it's a bit interesting because Cyclops, cycle is circle, ops is eye. So round eye or round eyes. It's a little more ambiguous than we would think. It's not like it's saying one-eyed. But anyway, the Cyclops, most famous among them is Polyphemus by virtue of the Odyssey. Polyphemus means many-voiced. So many people know about this specific person, giant. Not to get lost in the details here, but I just find these etymologies really curious and somewhat ambiguous when it comes to what we might assume of the Cyclops. But straightforward speaking, this is a cannibal. This isle, Sicily as it's been located, where this all takes place, is seen as being run by cannibals, people who are uncivilized. The allegory of the Odyssey is showing us that the Greeks are morally superior to these people, these giants that live here. And so with the context that we've been showing so far, this seems to be very related to the other stories that we've been seeing. These fearsome, other kinds of people who are bigger than us in stature. So now we can finally arrive at discussing the kind of hot button topic here, the Nephilim. And the Nephilim in the canonical Bible are scarcely mentioned. You could say maybe 3 times, but with certainty 2 times. Genesis 6:4, quote, "The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown." The other is Numbers 13:32. They said, "The land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are of great size. We saw the Nephilim there. We seemed like grasshoppers to them." You can see how unclear these passages are, seeing them for yourself. If angels mated with women and created the Nephilim, then Matthew 22:30 would contradict this, because it's implied. Anyway, quote, "For in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven." The implication being that angels are incorporeal and cannot mate with women. So, if this were to be true, then the canonical Bible would be contradicting itself. But if we don't assume this is the case, and we instead look at the sons of God and the Nephilim being separate in that passage, then we are the sons of God. So it's saying nothing more than the Nephilim were there, and also we were there. There's a lot of Gnostic speculation that goes into this as well, that the Nephilim came from Cain's lineage, and then we came from Seth's lineage. If you know your Gnosticism, then you know that this is a pretty deep cut into that area. And then you might say, but hey, what about the book of Enoch and the book of giants therein? The book of Enoch very much makes this case that the angels did in fact fall and mate with women, and that's what caused this lack of righteousness on the earth, this abomination that eventually had to bring the flood to cleanse the earth of the Nephilim. But we don't want to get lost in the weeds here. It's not my job to do this today. The point being is it's very clear that the Nephilim are viewed as great warriors and of great size. And might we also consider it a strangity that God, before becoming a monotheistic deity, if we take it back to the Canaanite, then this is a warrior deity, and in which case the sons of God, being the Nephilim, would be great warriors. So I'm saying there's some potential confusion about older inspirations bleeding their way into the new canon of Christianity, and that's why Christianity, when it would become canonized by the Temple of Nicaea and such, would want to distance itself from that of which Enoch is bringing in, if you catch what I'm doing there. It should be noted that the Book of Giants is very fragmentary. There's a lot of unknown that we can project in with how much it's missing. But therein, Gilgamesh is listed as one of these great warriors, as one of these Nephilim. So you see how truly strange this gets in its convolutedness. But it should be noted here this very loose analog, which is the War of the Titans when it comes to the Greek mythology. The same is mirrored in the Norse pantheon as well, where we had the older gods who were corrupted, that were overthrown by the perceptibly weaker, younger gods. So the younger divinity, or the lesser one, ends up triumphing over the much bigger warriors in order to bring about the new world. Thematically, you see these things are the same. Yes, the details are not matching, but thematically, that should be noted. And so we'll acknowledge the next one, and that is the Anunnaki. An is the sky father Anu, and Ki, which is earth. So Anunnaki, those from heaven came to earth, as one interpretation. The earliest reference of this word makes it very clear that this is the group of gods that were born from Anu and Ki. This group of 6 deities, known as the Anunnaki, is a loose conglomerate in the same way that the Ogdod were for the Egyptians. These firstborn deities, as a kind of simplistic way of putting it. If Anu is the great heavens and Ki is the underworld, then the Anunnaki are the deities that rule everything in between those two things. When the Hittites use this word, Anunnaki, they're specifically referring to the deities that were overthrown and are now in the underworld, that which was before the newer deities that are ruling. Again, an analogy to the Titan War. As a deeper historical cut, the Anunnaki are in charge of fate. So if Anu in the great heavens is the astrological cycles, then as ancient people during this time, we believe that everything is ordained by the heavens. And so who enforces that ordination from the great beyond? The intermediate powers do. And so it's no accident that in other iterations, the Anunnaki are the judges in the afterlife. Of course, they would know what had been done by this person because they are the enforcers of fate. Everything is informed by the stars and by the fate. So they are just simply the means, the intermediaries between that which is metaphysical, karmic, dharmic, you name it, and what we're going through. So if you actually dig in, you actually go through the historicity, understand these deities, look at their functions, how they were acknowledged, it's very strange for anybody to come out the gates and say, these are corporeal aliens. The gods are from and operate in the heavens. That's where the spirit world has always been understood as. Breath is spirit, spirit is air, ambience, vibes, all that is solicited from the heavens, from the stars. That's why we were always fixated on astrology from the very beginnings of spirituality and religious behavior. This is a culture that takes omens very seriously. They look to the stars continuously to see what they should do or to see if they get a sign that honors this decision that they made. They are very mindful of the messages that come from the heavens to man. To the Mayans, this was the vision serpent, and this could have been the form of sun rays. The idea that sun rays are what bring that ordination from the heavens, the visions from the heavens to us as a medium between that heavenly place, the spirit realm, the realm of the ancestors, and us, how it informs us. So whether to the Mayans that's the vision serpent, or to the Mesopotamians or the Hittites, what have you, is the Anunnaki. This doesn't need any corporealization or physical body. Mind you, one of these Anunnaki, this initial 6, is Ninhursag. This is the Lady of the Holy Mountain, as an intermediary between the heavens and the earth. If you just spend a sufficient amount of time in gaining the understanding of how the ancients understood the world, and specifically the nomenclature of the deification in Mesopotamia, then this is all very commonsensical. The gods were anthropomorphized commonly, and when they would be made quite big because they're a big deal. It's not that they are actually man-looking. They are represented. This is symbolism. This is depiction. So you make them big because they're metaphysical attributes. They are things beyond us. And so if they're beyond us, if we're going to depict them, we make them big. And so here's where we get into the real sauciness of this, and that's demigods. Would you be surprised if I were to tell you that there is a mythological history of the gods mating with mankind? Perseus, Hercules. There is a horribly long list of Greek demigods. Zeus was a very busy boy. And then over in Norse mythology and then over in the Philippines, and then a long list in India as well. You have the first kings of several African tribes being born of a god and of a mortal. Whether the mother was mortal or whether the father was mortal, this changes distinctively depending on the culture and depending on the story. This deserves its own session, the intricacies of this, but we've learned many times in the course how the ancient past and the rulers of the ancient past would tie themselves to deities. This is what gave them the right to rule. In Polynesia, you could trace your line to a god. In Egypt, if you were a pharaoh, you were semi-divinity. And then there's that former case of making someone divine. Imhotep, from Egypt as well, was a mortal, born a long time ago, and then over time it seemed that he gained a mythological status. Son of Thoth? ? And so there is many ways to go about understanding the demi-deification in the ancient world. There is this case of post-deification, where the memory of this specific person gets mythologized in such a way. But there's a greater understanding that we need to gain here. The gods were always viewed as intermediate in human form. What do I mean? Prophetic ecstasis, channeling a deity. The gods would give signs through embodying that deer in the field to give you a totem, or the owl, or in a person to give you advice. The gods would enter bodies in order to intervene. That was the thought. And so if somebody was created through regular means in a sexual act, who's to say whether one of them was currently embodying a god, that they had been, ordained in that way, given permission in that way, given the spark of divinity. This is a great way to explain how some people are special, whether they're gifted with great charisma or great understanding or great wisdom or great strength. If you want a hot take, then technically speaking, Jesus is a demigod. By the understanding of the ancients in this context, that's what's happening. So I ask again, is it strange that gods were viewed to breed with mankind? There's a lot to divulge in everything that's been mentioned in this session. There are so many points of this that deserve a lot more elaboration. But this, I think, is sufficient in giving the field, in giving the context in order to deconstruct, for instance, such a thing as the ancient alien hypothesis, and to gain a greater potential understanding means to interpret different myths of demigods and especially myths of giants. And let's review that. The mountain has a strange essence to it. It has always embodied something very reverential and liminal to us. The giants therein can be viewed as a part of the creator as they disassembled themselves. That was one way, stories of such. Or great beasts that are in fact out there, or certain stones that are presenting themselves as facial features naturally. And also, not to mention, the biological ancestral relatives of mankind as it bleeds far back into the deep past. What was our relation with these Australopithecus, with Neanderthalis, with Gigantopithecus? How could they have potentially informed our mythologies and informed our stories of giants? How many of these stories have become embellished in the game of telephone that is history and time? Were they great warriors to some people? Were they cannibals to others? Were they pacifists to others? This could help explain a lot of the anomalous. And then comes the nature spirit, or direct embodiments of divinity being big and depicting them as big, and using giants as an allegory in a more symbolic sense to illustrate them. These very real metaphysical attributes of the world given form in story or in statue. And then comes the huge trope in the ancient past of demi-divinity, of the mating between deities and mankind, and how down the game of telephone you can eventually get the confusion that you receive in the sparse passages to the Nephilim in the canonical Bible, or in whole the story of the Book of Giants, being this retelling potentially of people that were earnestly experienced by mankind deep into the ancient past, that have moved into a kind of mythologizing retelling. If I was going to do guesswork, then I would say that that explanation belongs in both the ancestral, the Neanderthalis or the Gigantopithecus, mixed with the tropes of demi-divinity, or the mythologizing after the fact, the deification after the fact, you see. Don't take that like I'm giving answers here. There's clearly a lot of mystery in this. The anomalous sights, the trope of the one-eyed Cyclops and the one-legged giant, and this universality apparently with that story from Peru of the giants with sexual deviancy, and the Nephilim having that claim of sexual deviancy as well. There's a lot still yet to learn, but I think this overall helps inform the different perspectives and the different means of interpreting these myths. The ice giants having something to do with the mountains as a spiritual embodiment, let's just guess. This is a greater means to access those things on the level of perhaps those that created these stories. But if you want aliens, you can have aliens. But now you have a great number of other means to interpret topics in the ancient past that tend to attract sensationalism. The Spiritual Studies course is an effort towards free public education on matters of spirituality, religion, and comparative mythology. It seeks to offer this in a sober and earnest fashion. Supporting the course in the Buy Me Coffee link in the description box below supports this information getting out there, emboldening it. And so it's in great thanks to those that have been among the first to support this initiative, and that is Slow Leak, John Crestwell, Deborah Cano, the Satyr Witch, Kristen, Nora, the Irrational Sage, Scorson, Craig Mitchell, and quote, someone. Stay curious and keep seeking.